All right, we are going into chapter 2 in the Think Python book where we're going to look at variables a little more. So I've already made a variables project in PyCharm, just using the create new project. But I haven't done anything else with it. I just made the project. So in this project, I want to make a script file. So I right-clicked on variables. Let's do this again. Right-clicked on variables, went to new, and a Python file, and I need to give it a name, so I'm just going to call it var, which is short for variables. Okay, so now I have a script I can work in. I always like to have the project window open, so I want to view and tool windows and open up the project window. Okay, so in Python there are a few different variables that we need to keep track of. There are integers. Notice that when I just declared a variable x to be equal to 2, and when I did that, notice that I put space between the equal signs and the 2. If you don't, then Python's going to complain at you. This is called a PEP, a PEP, and basically PEPs are a series of agreements that the people that write the Python code base have agreed on. This is the way you should write Python to make it look right. So when you are declaring variables like this, they want spaces around the equal signs. Okay, so there are integers. There are floats. Floats are numbers that have decimals in them. And I just screwed up pi. And there are strings. Now, Python, when you declare a variable like this, has to do a couple of things. First of all, you have to give it an indication as to what kind of information you're going to be storing. An integer versus a float versus a string. And the integer versus float is pretty simple. If you put a decimal point in it, then it's a float. If it doesn't have a decimal point, it's an integer. And if you put something in quotes like this, then it's going to be a string. Now, if you try to get rid of the quotes and just have a string without quotes, then Python's going to say, what are you doing? What is this hello world thing? It actually, when it's saying unresolved reference, Python actually thinks that you're trying to declare or that hello world is some kind of variable and it's confused. So whenever you want to use letters in one of your variable declarations, you got to have in quotes. You have to make it a string. Okay, so you tell then Python what kind of variable type you're going to be doing just by how you declare the variable. Whether it's an integer, decimal places makes it a float, or putting quotes around something makes it a string. Even if it's only one character long, that's still a string. And even if it's a string that has a number in it, still a string. Now, the other part of this is we are doing a variable declaration. So with this equal signs, again, that doesn't mean this is some kind of equation. This equal sign means, hey, I need some new space. That new space is going to store a string, and that string is going to be called hello world. So what's going on behind the scenes is your computer has RAM in it. When you spec out a computer, one of the things you look at is how much RAM does it have, or random access memory. The memory is where the computer does all its work and where it stores things. So when you say I want Z to be hello world, then Python behind the scenes goes out to the operating system controls the RAM, and says, hey, I need some space in RAM. So it gives it some space. We'll call it Z. And in that space, I want to put hello world. So you can think of your RAM as just a big, long list broken up into bytes. That's how you specify RAM, is how many bytes you have, right? And in each byte, when you do a character string, or do a string, each byte gets a single letter. So hello world would look like this in RAM. So when you do a variable declaration, not only are you telling Python what kind of variable you want, but you're also telling it, hey, go out and get some space for me for this. And Python, nicely enough, handles how much space you need. It's not something that you need to worry about. Python takes care of all of that for you. Okay, now what I wanted to talk about more in terms of variables was called a namespace for Python. So the namespace for a programming language is what kind of variable names can you have. So far we've used X, Y, and Z, but those are not brilliant names. They're not very descriptive. What if I wanted to declare something called pi? So I'll have pi, and pi is going to be equal to 3.14159, not 414159. So you can have more than one letter in your variable names. You can have more than one word in your name, so in a variable name. So we could do something like Jim Bob. That can be a variable name. And oops. We'll make Jim Bob a string, Jim Robert. So you can have multiple words in your variable name, the name for your variable, as long as they're separated by underscores. You can't use spaces in a variable name. You can put them together. You could just call it Jim Bob like that, but Python really, it's going to complain at you a little bit and say you have a typo. It really prefers that you have the two names separated by an underscore. So again, this is called the namespace. The namespace is what kinds of things can I call my variables. You can have numbers. So we could have Jim1. And Jim2. So maybe there's a father and a son or something like that. So you can put numbers in. We could do pi to exponent, something like that. So you can put numbers in the middle of your variable names. And it could be 3.148 or 58, whatever that is. So that's pi to exponent, whatever that means. The important part of this, again, is that you can put numbers in the middle of your variable names, but you cannot put numbers at the beginning of a variable name. You can put them at the end, in the middle, but you cannot have a number as the very first piece of a variable name. Okay, so for variable names, you can use letters and numbers, combinations of those, underscores. Just don't put any numbers at the beginning, and don't try to put the name in quotes. When you do that, you're saying that this thing is now a string. And as far as Python is concerned, or any programming language is concerned, once you declare that to be a string, that's a constant. That's just like saying that I want to assign the value of 5 to 2. That doesn't make any sense. 2 is 2. You can't assign it a different value. It's always going to be 2. You can't go ahead and make it 5. This isn't an equation to be solved. It's a declaration, and you're trying to say I want 5 to be 2. You can't do that. Here you're not saying I want this to be the variable pi. What you're saying is I want 3.14159 to be the letters pi. Well, the letters pi are not 3.14159. They're the letters P and I from the alphabet. So up here, when we did pi equals 3.14159, we're not thinking of these as the letters P and I from the alphabet. We're just thinking of this as some way of calling this variable. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about namespace. And now I'm going to talk about a built-in feature in Python. So we haven't done anything with all these variables, and at some point in time, oh, I can't have this variable up here, the 2pi exponent. So there's a built-in function in Python called type. And if you have a variable, you can ask what type it is. Now, x here is going to be an integer. The problem is I can ask for the type of x, but when we are in script mode, that won't print out unless we ask it to. So again, when you're in script mode, you have to print out everything or it won't print. Okay, so let's look at what happens here. So we're going to run var. Now what's going to happen is we're going to assign a value to x, y, z, pi, gymbob, gym1, gym2, pi2 exponent. But we're actually only going to see one output. This is the only thing we're printing out is the type of x. Okay, so let's run this. And it says x is an integer. So again, when you declare a variable, Python automatically types that for you, and it figures out that you want an integer. So we can go ahead and print the type for y, and we can print the type for, let's see, gymbob. And if we wanted to, we don't have to have variables in here. We could print the type for 2.71828. So what do you think we're going to get? X we already know is an integer. Y should be a float. Gymbob down here should be a string. And 2.71828 should be a float. Okay, so that's what we got. All right, so we've learned a few things. We've learned about the namespace for Python, which is just what kind of characters can I use to build up a name for a variable. We've learned a little bit about the different types of variables that you can have, although behind the scenes, we're really not going to, that all happens behind the scenes. We're not really going to have to worry about that because Python is going to just take care of the types for us. And then we learn about a built-in kind of function that will tell us the type of a variable if we want to.